Hey guys, it's Untitled History and welcome to this week's episode. This week we will be taking a look at LBJ.
That's right. Good job, Henry. That's right. As Henry said, and hello everyone, TJ with Dead History.
Hello.
This week we're going to be taking a look at what number president?
The 36th President of the United States.
The 36th President of the United States. Very good. Lyndon Baines Johnson. Good old LBJ. And before we get into all the fun, fascinating things about LBJ, you got to tell the people, Henry, what do they got to do?
Hit subscribe down below, leave all your comments, questions, give us a thumbs up, hit that bell, and leave a like.
That's right. Good job. Hit subscribe down below. Give us comments and questions. We love those.
Yes.
Give us a like and a thumbs up. And of course, hit that little notification bell so you can be notified every time we release a new video, which, Henry, tell the people, when is it?
Every week.
Every single week, is right. So, now, here we go. We're going to get into, in our next presidential series installment, the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And this is
Dead History.
Dead History. Hey guys, welcome back. TJ with Dead History here with Henry.
Hi.
And of course, who's the guy behind us, Henry?
LBJ.
What's so funny, you giggle monster? Good old LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. What number president, Henry?
The 36th President of the United States.
That's right, the 36th President of the United States. Our next presidential series installment. Some really cool things about LBJ. That good old Texan himself. Yes, he was from the great state of Texas. That's right, Texas. And another cool thing about LBJ, supposedly as the story goes, he was once shot at by enemy fire during a World War II mission when he was in the air. Supposedly. There's conflicting stories. Some people say he was shot at. Some people say a plane actually turned around and went back to the air base. But we're going to get into all that. And then, of course, how can we bring up and talk about LBJ without talking about what, Henry?
The potato chips and soda.
No, not that yet. The Johnson treatment, right? Right, Henry? The Johnson treatment. The Johnson treatment. Supposedly, LBJ was a very intimidating man who did not really care for anybody's personal space. He would get in your face, and he would intimidate you, and he would offer you favors, and he would promise you things just in order to sway your vote in favor of what he wanted in his agenda. It was known as the Johnson treatment. So, we're going to get into all that as well. Okay, you did the likes. They did the subscribes. Hopefully the comments and questions, right? We love those.
Yes.
Hopefully. And the notification bell, they did all of it. Henry, I should just walk away. What do they got to get now?
Get the potato chips and soda, the popcorn and the pretzels.
That's right. Good job. Your famous line. You did it a little early, but that's okay. You did it again. Go get the potato chips, the soda, the popcorn, the pretzels, whatever, as Henry would say. And now sit back and relax, because we're going to take a look at the man behind us, the 36th President of the United States. Who is it?
LBJ.
LBJ, good old Lyndon Baines Johnson. Enjoy.
Hey guys, it's Dead History, and I hope you enjoy this episode of LBJ. Enjoy.
Hey guys, welcome. Welcome to Dead History. This is TJ, and welcome to our next presidential series installment, taking a look at the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Good old LBJ. So I am flying solo here for the audio portion. We're going to jump right in. Obviously, LBJ, definitely interesting. Some very interesting things to tell you about LBJ. Not nearly as much information or bonus footage or anything like that regarding LBJ as opposed to JFK. Obviously, I've actually seen more JFK stuff, or I should say JFK-related stuff, whether it be grave sites of family members or, birthplaces and, all that stuff. I've seen more for JFK probably than any other president far and away. So, unfortunately, LBJ, I don't have nearly as much bonus footage to show you, but we'll still hopefully get some stuff in. All right, here we go. I'm going to jump right in. As we know, our part 1 is going to consist of early life, childhood, birthplace, that sort of thing of our 36th president, LBJ. And then in part 2, tomorrow, we'll talk about his presidency, legacy, death, all that stuff. All right, here we go. Lyndon Baines Johnson was born on August 27th of 1908 near Stonewall, Texas, in a small farmhouse on the Pedernales River. He was the eldest of 5 children born to Samuel Early Johnson Jr. and Rebekah Baines. Johnson had one brother, Sam Houston Johnson, and he had 3 sisters, Rebecca, Josepha, and Lucia. The nearby small town of Johnson City, Texas, was named after LBJ's father's cousin, James Polk Johnson, whose forebears had moved west from Georgia. Johnson had English, Irish, German, and Ulster Scots ancestry. Through his mother, he was a great-grandson of pioneer Baptist clergyman George Washington Baines, who pastored 8 churches in Texas, as well as others in Arkansas and Louisiana. Baines was also the president of Baylor University during the American Civil War. LBJ's grandfather, Samuel Early Johnson Sr., was raised as a Baptist and for a time was a member of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. In his later years, the grandfather became a Christadelphian. Johnson's father also joined the Christadelphian Church toward the end of his life. Later, as a politician, Johnson was influenced in his positive attitude towards Jews by the religious beliefs that his family, especially his grandfather, had shared with him. Johnson's favorite Bible verse came from the King James Version of Isaiah, chapter 1, verse 18. Come now and let us reason together. In school, Johnson was a talkative youth who was elected president of his 11th grade class. He graduated in 1924 from Johnson City High School, where he participated in public speaking, debate, and baseball. At the age of 15, Johnson was the youngest member of his class. Pressured by his parents to attend college, he enrolled at a sub-college of Southwest Texas State Teachers College in the summer of 1924, where students from unaccredited high schools could take the 12th grade courses needed for admission to college. He left the school just weeks after his arrival and decided to move to Southern California. He worked at his cousin's legal practice and in various odd jobs before returning to Texas, where he worked as a day laborer. In 1926, Lyndon Johnson managed to enroll at SWTSTC, which is now Texas State University. He worked his way through school, participated in debate and campus politics, and edited the school newspaper, the College Star. The college years refined his skills of persuasion and political organization. For 9 months, from 1928 to 1929, Johnson paused his studies to teach Mexican-American children at the segregated Wellhausen School in Cotulla, some 90 miles south of San Antonio in LaSalle County. The job helped him to save money to complete his education, and he graduated in 1930 with a Bachelor of Science degree in history and his certificate of qualification as a high school teacher. He briefly taught at Pearsall High School before taking a position as a teacher of public speaking at Sam Houston High School in Houston. When he returned to San Marcos in 1965 after signing the Higher Education Act of 1965, Johnson reminisced, I shall never forget the faces of the boys and the girls in that little Wellhausen Mexican school. And I remember even yet the pain of realizing and knowing then that college was closed to practically every one of those children because they were too poor. And I think it was then that I made up my mind that this nation could never rest while the door to knowledge remained closed to any American. So there you go, kind of the young life and childhood and birthplace of Lyndon Baines Johnson. After Richard M. Kleberg won a 1931 special election to represent Texas in the United States House of Representatives, he appointed Johnson as his legislative secretary. Lyndon Johnson got the position on the recommendation of his father and that of State Senator Welly Hopkins, for whom Johnson had campaigned in 1930. Kleberg had little interest in performing the day-to-day duties of a congressman, instead delegating them to Lyndon Johnson. After Franklin Delano Roosevelt won the 1932 presidential election, Johnson became a staunch supporter of Roosevelt's New Deal. Johnson was elected Speaker of the Little Congress, a group of congressional aides where he cultivated congressmen, newspapermen, and lobbyists. Johnson's friends soon included aides to President Roosevelt as well as fellow Texans such as Vice President John Nance Garner and Congressman Sam Rayburn. Johnson married Claudia Alta Taylor, also known as Lady Bird, of Karnak, Texas, on November 17th of 1934. Johnson met her after he had attended Georgetown University Law Center for several months. Johnson later quit his Georgetown studies after his first semester in 1934. During their first date, he asked her to marry him, and many dates later, she finally agreed. The wedding was officiated by Reverend Arthur R. McKinstry at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in San Antonio. They had two daughters, Lynda Bird, born in 1944, and LUCI Baines, born in 1947. Johnson gave his children names with the LBJ initials. His dog was Little Beagle Johnson, also an LBJ. His home was the LBJ Ranch. His initials were on his cufflinks, ashtrays, and clothes. During his marriage, Lyndon Johnson had affairs with multiple women, in particular with Alice Marsh, who assisted him politically. In 1935, he was appointed head of the Texas National Youth Administration, which enabled him to use the government to create education and job opportunities for young people. He resigned 2 years later to run for Congress. Johnson, a notoriously tough boss throughout his career, often demanded long workdays and work on weekends. He was described by friends, fellow politicians, and historians as motivated by an exceptional lust for power and control. As Johnson's biographer Robert Caro observes, Johnson's ambition was uncommon in the degree to which it was unencumbered by even the slightest excess weight of ideology, of philosophy, of principles, of beliefs. So there you go. Good old LBJ was a bit of a hard, excuse my language, a bit of a hard ass. He was a tough boss. So, interesting. Now we're going to move on to his time in the U.S. House of Representatives. In 1937, after the death of 13-term Congressman James P. Buchanan, Lyndon Johnson successfully campaigned in a special election for Texas's 10th Congressional District that covered Austin and the surrounding hill country. He ran on a New Deal platform and was effectively aided by his wife. He served in the House from April 10th of 1937. Sorry about that. I was getting a phone call. So where was I? He served in the House from April 10th of 1937 to January 3rd of 1949. President FDR found Lyndon Johnson to be a welcome ally and conduit for information, particularly about issues concerning internal politics in Texas, Operation Texas, and the machinations of Vice President John Nance Garner and Speaker of the House Sam Rayburn. Johnson was immediately appointed to the Naval Affairs Committee. He worked for rural electrification and other improvements for his district. Johnson steered the projects towards contractors he knew, such as Herman and George Brown, who would finance much of Johnson's future career. In 1941, he ran for the Democratic U.S. Senate nomination in a special election, losing narrowly to the sitting governor of Texas, businessman and radio personality W. Lee O'Daniel. O'Daniel received 175,590 votes, 30.49%, to Johnson's 174,279 votes, 30.26%. So a very close, narrowly lost election for LBJ. Now a little bit about his active military duty. Johnson was appointed a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Naval Reserve on June 21st of 1940. While serving as a U.S. representative, he was called to active duty 3 days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. His orders were to report to the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations in Washington, D.C. for instruction and training. Following his training, he asked Undersecretary of the Navy James Forrestal for a combat assignment. He was sent instead to inspect shipyard facilities in Texas and on the West Coast. In the spring of 1942, President Roosevelt decided he needed better information on conditions in the Southwest Pacific and to send a highly trusted political ally to get it. From a suggestion by Forrestal, Roosevelt assigned Lyndon Johnson to a 3-man survey team covering the Southwest Pacific. Johnson reported to General Douglas MacArthur in Australia. Johnson and 2 U.S. Army officers went to the 22nd Bomb Group base, which was assigned the high-risk mission of bombing the Japanese airbase at Laos in New Guinea. On June 9th of 1942, Johnson volunteered as an observer for an airstrike on New Guinea by B-26 bombers. Reports vary on what happened to the aircraft carrying Johnson during that mission. Johnson's biographer Robert Caro accepts Johnson's account and supports it with testimony from the aircrew concerned. The aircraft was attacked, disabling one engine, and it turned back before reaching its objective, though remaining under the heavy fire. Others claim that it turned back because of generator trouble before reaching the objective and before encountering enemy aircraft and never came under fire. This is supported by official flight records. Other airplanes that continued to the target came under fire near the target about the same time Johnson's plane was recorded as having landed back at the original airbase. MacArthur recommended Johnson for the Silver Star for gallantry in action, the only member of the crew to receive a decoration. After it was approved by the Army, he presented the medal to Johnson with the following citation: for the gallantry in action in the vicinity of Port Moresby and Salamoa, New Guinea, on June 9th of 1942. While on a mission of obtaining information in the Southwest Pacific area, Lieutenant Commander Johnson, to obtain personal knowledge of combat conditions, volunteered as an observer on a hazardous aerial combat mission over hostile positions in New Guinea. As our planes neared the target area, they were intercepted by 8 hostile fighters. When at this time, the plane in which Lieutenant Commander Johnson was an observer developed mechanical trouble and was forced to turn back alone, presenting a favorable target to the enemy fighters. He evidenced marked coolness despite the hazards involved. His gallant actions enabled him to obtain a return with valuable information. Johnson, who had used a movie camera to record conditions, reported to Roosevelt, to Navy leaders, and Congress that conditions were deplorable and unacceptable. Some historians have suggested this was in exchange for MacArthur's recommendation to award the Silver Star. He argued that the Southwest Pacific urgently needed a higher priority and a larger share of war supplies. The warplanes sent there, for example, were far inferior to Japanese planes, and morale was bad. He told Forrestal that the Pacific Fleet had a critical need for 6,800 additional experienced men. Johnson prepared a 12-point program to upgrade the effort in the region, stressing greater cooperation and coordination within the various commands and between the different war theaters. Congress responded by making Johnson chairman of a high-powered subcommittee of the Naval Affairs Committee, with a mission similar to that of the Truman Committee in the Senate. He probed the peacetime, business-as-usual inefficiencies that permeated the naval war and demanded that admirals shape up and get the job done. Johnson went too far when he proposed a bill that would crack down on the draft exemptions of shipyard workers if they were absent from work too often. Organized labor blocked the bill and denounced him. Johnson's biographer, Robert Dallek, concludes, the mission was a temporary exposure to danger calculated to satisfy Johnson's personal and political wishes. Sorry, I was getting another call there. Satisfy Johnson's personal and political wishes, but it also represented a genuine effort on his part, however misplaced, to improve the lot of America's fighting men. In addition to the Silver Star, Johnson received the American Campaign Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. He was released from active duty on July 17th of 1942, and he remained in the Navy Reserve, later promoted to commander on October 19th of 1949. He resigned from the Navy Reserve effective January 18th of 1964. So there you go, a little bit about Johnson's military career and a little bit of controversy surrounding if his plane was shot at and came under enemy fire or not. Interesting there. So now in 1948, the U.S. Senate election. In the 1948 elections, Lyndon Johnson again ran for the Senate and won in a highly controversial Democratic Party primary against the well-known former governor, Coke Stevenson. Johnson drew crowds to fairgrounds with his rented helicopter dubbed the Johnson City Windmill. He raised money to flood the state with campaign circulars and won over conservatives by casting doubts on Stevenson's support for the Taft-Hartley Act. Stevenson came in first in the primary but lacked a majority, so a runoff election was held. Johnson campaigned harder while Stevenson's efforts slumped due to a lack of funds. Historian of the United States presidency, Michael Beschloss observes that Johnson gave white supremacist speeches during the 1948 campaign, cementing his reputation as a moderate in American politics, which enabled future success in advancing civil rights causes. The runoff vote count handled by the Democratic State Central Committee took a week. Johnson was announced the winner by 87 votes out of 988,295, an extremely narrow margin of victory. However, Johnson's victory was based on 200 patently fraudulent ballots reported six days after the election from Box 13 in Jim Wells County, in an area dominated by political boss George Parr. The added names were in alphabetical order and written with the same pen and handwriting. following at the end of the list of voters, some of the persons in this part of the list insisted that they had not voted that day. Election Judge Luis Salas said in 1977 that he had certified 202 fraudulent ballots for Lyndon Johnson. Robert Caro made the case in his 1990 book that Johnson had stolen the election in Jim Wells County and that there were thousands of fraudulent voters in other counties as well, including 10,000 votes switched in San Antonio. The Democratic State Central Committee voted to certify Johnson's nomination by a majority of one. It was 29 to 28, the vote, with the last vote cast on Johnson's behalf by the publisher Frank W. Mayborn of Temple, Texas. The state Democratic Convention upheld Johnson. Stevenson went to court, eventually taking his case before the U.S. Supreme Court, but with timely help from his friend and future U.S. Supreme Court Justice Abe Fortas, Johnson prevailed on the basis that jurisdiction over naming a nominee rested with the party, not the federal government. Johnson soundly defeated Republican Jack Porter in the general election in November and went to Washington, permanently dubbed Landslide Lyndon. Johnson, dismissive of his critics, happily adopted the nickname. Once in the Senate, Lyndon Johnson was known among his colleagues for his highly successful courtships of older senators, especially Senator Richard Russell, Democrat from Georgia, the leader of the conservative coalition, and arguably the most powerful man in the Senate. Johnson proceeded to gain Russell's favor in the same way he had courted Speaker Sam Rayburn and gained his crucial support in the House. Johnson was appointed to the Senate Armed Services Committee, and in 1950, he helped create the Preparedness Investigating Subcommittee. He became its chairman and conducted investigations of defense costs and efficiency. These investigations revealed old investigations and demanded actions that were already being taken in part by the Truman administration. Although it can be said that the committee's investigations reinforced the need for changes. Johnson gained headlines and national attention through his handling of the press, the efficiency with which his committee issued new reports, and the fact that he ensured that every report was endorsed unanimously by the committee. He used his political influence in the Senate to receive broadcast licenses from the Federal Communications Commission in his wife's name. After the 1950 general elections, Johnson was chosen as Senate Majority Whip in 1951 under the new Majority Leader, Ernest McFarland of Arizona, and served from 1951 to 1953. In the 1952 general election, Republicans won a majority in both the House and Senate. Among defeated Democrats that year was McFarland, who lost to upstart Barry Goldwater. In January of 1953, Lyndon Johnson was chosen by his fellow Democrats to be Minority Leader. He became the most junior senator ever elected to this position. One of his first actions was to eliminate the seniority system in making appointments to committees while retaining it for chairmanships. In the 1954 election, Lyndon Johnson was reelected to the Senate, and since the Democrats won the majority in the Senate, he then became the Majority Leader. Former Majority Leader William Knowland of California became the Minority Leader. Johnson's duties were to schedule legislation and help pass measures favored by the Democrats. Johnson, Rayburn, and President Dwight D. Eisenhower worked well together in passing Eisenhower's domestic and foreign agenda. During the Suez Crisis, Johnson tried to prevent the U.S. government from criticizing the Israeli invasion of the Sinai Peninsula. Along with the rest of the nation, Johnson was appalled by the threat of possible Soviet domination of space flight implied by the launch of the first artificial Earth satellite, Sputnik 1, and used his influence to ensure passage of the 1958 National Aeronautics and Space Act, which established the civilian space agency, NASA. Historians Caro and Dallek consider Lyndon Johnson the most effective Senate Majority Leader in history. He was unusually proficient at gathering information. One biographer suggests he was the greatest intelligence gatherer Washington has ever known, discovering exactly where every senator stood on issues, his philosophy and prejudices, his strengths and weaknesses, and what it took to get his vote. Robert Baker claimed that Johnson would occasionally send senators on NATO trips to avoid their dissenting votes. Central to Johnson's control was the treatment described by two journalists. This is good. The treatment could last 10 minutes or 4 hours. It came enveloping its target. At the Johnson Ranch swimming pool, in one of Johnson's offices, in the Senate cloakroom, on the floor of the Senate itself, wherever Johnson might find a fellow senator within his reach. Its tone could be supplication, accusation, exuberance, scorn, tears, complaint, and the hint of threat. It was all of these together. It ran the gamut of human emotions. Its velocity was breathtaking, and it was all in one direction. Interjections from the target were rare. Johnson anticipated them before they could be spoken. He moved in close, his face a scant millimeter from his target, his eyes widening and narrowing, his eyebrows rising and falling. From his pockets poured clippings, memos, statistics. Mimicry, humor, and the genius of analogy made the treatment an almost hypnotic experience and rendered the target stunned and helpless. In 1955, Democratic Majority's new leader, Lyndon Johnson, persuaded Oregon's independent Wayne Morse to join the Democratic caucus. A 60 cigarette per day smoker, Lyndon Johnson suffered a near fatal heart attack on July 2nd of 1955. He abruptly gave up smoking as a result, and with only a couple of exceptions, did not resume the habit until after he left the White House on January 20th of 1969. Lyndon Johnson announced he would remain as his party's leader in the Senate on New Year's Eve of 1955. His doctors reporting he had made a most satisfactory recovery since his heart attack 5 months prior. And yes, I did say 60 cigarettes per day smoker. Can you imagine 60 cigarettes a day? My Lord. So now the campaigns of 1960. Johnson's success in the Senate rendered him a potential Democratic presidential candidate. He had been the favorite son candidate of the Texas delegation at the party's national convention in 1956 and appeared to be in a strong position to run for the 1960 nomination. Jim Rowe repeatedly urged Johnson to launch a campaign in early 1959, but Johnson thought it better to wait, thinking that John Kennedy's efforts would create a division in the ranks which could then be exploited. Rowe finally joined the Humphrey campaign in frustration, another move that Johnson thought played into his own strategy. Lyndon Johnson made a late entry into the campaign in July of 1960, which, coupled with a reluctance to leave Washington, allowed the rival John Kennedy campaign to secure a substantial early advantage among Democratic state party officials. Johnson underestimated Kennedy's endearing qualities of charm and intelligence as compared to his reputation as the more crude and wheeling-dealing Landslide Lyndon. Caro suggests that Johnson's hesitancy was the result of an overwhelming fear of failure. Johnson attempted in vain to capitalize on Kennedy's youth, poor health, and failure to take a position regarding Joseph McCarthy. He had formed a Stop Kennedy coalition with ADLAI Stevenson, Stuart Symington, and Hubert Humphrey, but it proved a failure. Johnson received 409 votes on the only ballot at the Democratic Convention to Kennedy's 806, and so the convention nominated Kennedy. Tip O'Neill was a representative from Kennedy's home state of Massachusetts at that time, and he recalled that Johnson approached him at the convention and said, "Tip, I know you have to support Kennedy at the start, but I'd like you to have you with me on that second ballot." O'Neill replied, "Senator, there's not going to be any second ballot." According to Kennedy's special counsel, Meyer Feldman, and Kennedy himself, it is impossible to reconstruct the precise manner in which Johnson's vice presidential nomination ultimately took place. Kennedy did realize that he could not be elected without the support of traditional Southern Democrats, most of whom had backed Johnson. Nevertheless, labor leaders were unanimous in their opposition to Johnson. AFL-CIO President George Meany called Johnson the arch foe of labor, while Illinois AFL-CIO President Reuben Soderstrom asserted Kennedy had made chumps out of leaders of the American labor movement. After much back and forth with the party leaders and others on the matter, Kennedy did offer Johnson the vice presidential nomination at the Los Angeles Biltmore Hotel at 10:15 a.m. on July 14th, the morning after he was nominated, and Lyndon Johnson accepted. From that point to the actual nomination that evening, the facts are in dispute in many respects. Convention Chairman Leroy Collins' declaration of a 2/3 majority in favor by voice vote is even disputed. Seymour Hersh stated that Robert F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, hated Johnson for his attacks on the Kennedy family, and later maintained that his brother offered the position to Johnson merely as a courtesy, expecting him to decline. Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. concurred with Bobby Kennedy's versions of the events and put forth that John F. Kennedy would have preferred Stuart Symington as his running mate, alleging that Johnson teamed with House Speaker Sam Rayburn and pressured Kennedy to favor Johnson. Bobby Kennedy wanted his brother to choose labor leader Walter Reuther. Biographer Robert Caro offered a different perspective. He wrote that the Kennedy campaign was desperate to win with what was forecast to be a very close election against Richard Nixon and Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. And Johnson was needed on the ticket to help carry Texas and the southern states. Caro's research showed that on July 14th, John F. Kennedy started the process while Johnson was still asleep. At 6:30 a.m., JFK asked Bobby Kennedy to prepare an estimate of upcoming electoral votes, including Texas. Bobby called Pierre Salinger and Kenny O'Donnell to assist him. Salinger realized the ramifications of counting Texas votes as their own and asked him whether he was considering a Kennedy-Johnson ticket, and Bobby replied, yes. Caro contends that it was then that JFK called Johnson to arrange a meeting. He also called Pennsylvania Governor David L. Lawrence, a Johnson backer, to request that he nominate Johnson for vice president if Johnson were to accept the role. According to Caro, Kennedy and Johnson met, and Johnson said that Kennedy would have trouble with Kennedy supporters who were anti-Johnson. Kennedy returned to his suite to announce the Kennedy-Johnson ticket to his closest supporters, including northern political bosses. O'Donnell was angry at what he considered a betrayal by Kennedy, who had previously cast Johnson as anti-labor and anti-liberal. Afterward, Bobby Kennedy visited labor leaders who were extremely unhappy with the choice of Johnson, and after seeing the depth of the labor opposition to Johnson, Bobby ran messages between the hotel suites of his brother and Lyndon Johnson, apparently trying to undermine the proposed ticket without JFK's authorization. Caro continues in his analysis that Bobby Kennedy tried to get Johnson to agree to be the Democratic chairman rather than the vice president. Johnson refused to accept the change in plans unless it came directly from JFK. Despite his brother's interference, JFK was firm that Johnson was who he wanted as running mate. He met with staffers such as Larry O'Brien, his national campaign manager, to say that Johnson was to be vice president. O'Brien recalled later that JFK's words were wholly unexpected, but that after a brief consideration of the electoral vote situation, he thought it was a stroke of genius. When John and Bobby Kennedy next saw their father, Joe Kennedy, he told them that signing Johnson as running mate was the smartest thing they had ever done. Another account of how Johnson's nomination came about was told by Evelyn Lincoln, JFK's secretary. In 1993, in a videotaped interview, she described how the decision was made, stating she was the only witness to a private meeting between John and Bobby Kennedy in a suite at the Biltmore Hotel where they made the decision. She said she went in and out of the room as they spoke, and while she was in the room, she heard them say that Johnson had tried to blackmail JFK into offering him the vice presidential nomination with evidence of JFK's womanizing provided by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. She also overheard them discuss possible ways to avoid making the offer and ultimately conclude that JFK had no choice. At the same time as his vice presidential run, Lyndon Johnson also sought a third term in the U.S. Senate. And according to Robert Caro, on November 8th of 1960, Lyndon Johnson won an election for both the vice presidency of the United States on the Kennedy-Johnson ticket and for a third term as senator. He actually had Texas law changed to allow him to run for both offices. When he won the vice presidency, he made arrangements to resign from the Senate, and he was required to do under federal law as soon as it convened on January 3rd of 1961. Actually, in 1988, Lloyd Bentsen, the vice presidential running mate of Democratic presidential candidate Michael Dukakis, and a senator from Texas, took advantage of Lyndon's law and was able to retain his seat in the Senate despite Dukakis' loss to George H.W. Bush. So interestingly enough, that proved to come to fruition years later. Johnson was reelected senator with 1,306,605 votes, 58% to Republican John Tower's 927,653 votes, 41.1%. Fellow Democrat William A. Blakely was appointed to replace Johnson as senator, but Blakely lost a special election in May of 1961 to John Tower. So there you go. That leads us all the way up to Johnson's vice presidency. And I'll read you here a little bit about his vice presidency. After the election, Lyndon Johnson was quite concerned about the traditionally ineffective nature of his new office and set about to assume authority not allotted to the position. He initially sought a transfer of the authority of Senate Majority Leader to the vice presidency, since that office made him president of the Senate, but faced vehement opposition from the Democratic caucus, including members whom he had counted as his supporters. Johnson sought to increase his influence within the executive branch. He drafted an executive order for Kennedy's signature, granting Johnson general supervision over matters of national security and requiring all government agencies to cooperate fully with the vice president in the carrying out of these assignments. Kennedy's response was to sign a non-binding letter requesting Johnson to review national security policies instead. Kennedy similarly turned down early requests from Johnson to be given an office adjacent to the Oval Office and to employ a full-time vice presidential staff within the White House. His lack of influence was thrown into relief later in 1961 when Kennedy appointed Johnson's friend Sarah T. Hughes to a federal judgeship, whereas Johnson had tried and failed to garner the nomination for Hughes at the beginning of his vice presidency. House Speaker Sam Rayburn wrangled the appointment from Kennedy in exchange for support of an administration bill. Moreover, many members of the Kennedy White House were contemptuous of Johnson, including the president's brother, Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, and they ridiculed his comparatively brusque, crude manner. Congressman Tip O'Neill recalled that the Kennedy men had a disdain for Johnson that they didn't even try to hide. They actually took pride in snubbing him. Kennedy, however, made efforts to keep Johnson busy, informed, and at the White House often, telling aides, "I can't afford to have my vice president, who knows every reporter in Washington, going around saying we're all screwed up, so we're going to keep him happy." Kennedy appointed him to jobs such as the head of the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunities, through which he worked with African Americans and other minorities. Kennedy may have intended this to remain a more nominal position, but Taylor Branch contends in Pillar of Fire that Johnson pushed the Kennedy administration's actions further and faster for civil rights than Kennedy originally intended to go. Branch notes the irony of Johnson being the advocate for civil rights when the Kennedy family had hoped that he would appeal to conservative Southern voters. In particular, he notes Johnson's Memorial Day 1963 speech at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, as being a catalyst that led to more action. Johnson took on numerous minor diplomatic missions, which gave him some insights into global issues as well as opportunities for self-promotion in the name of showing the country's flag. During his visit to West Berlin on August 19th and 20th of 1961, Lyndon Johnson calmed Berliners who were outraged by the building of the Berlin Wall. He also attended Cabinet and National Security Council meetings. Kennedy gave Johnson control over all presidential appointments involving Texas and appointed him chairman of the President's Ad Hoc Committee for Science. Kennedy also appointed Johnson chairman of the National Aeronautics and Space Council. The Soviets beat the United States with the first manned spaceflight in April of 1961, and Kennedy gave Johnson the task of evaluating the state of the U.S. space program and recommending a project that would allow the United States to catch up or beat the Soviets. Johnson responded with a recommendation that the United States gain the leadership role by committing the resources to embark on a project to land an American on the moon in the 1960s. Kennedy assigned priority to the space program, but Johnson's appointment provided potential cover in case of a failure. Johnson was touched by a Senate scandal in August of 1963 when Bobby Baker, the secretary to the majority leader of the Senate and a protege of Johnson's, came under investigation by the Senate Rules Committee for allegations of bribery and financial malfeasance. One witness alleged that Baker had arranged for the witness to give kickbacks for the vice president. Baker resigned in October, and the investigation did not expand to Johnson. The negative publicity from the affair fed rumors in Washington circles that Kennedy was planning on dropping Johnson from the Democratic ticket in the upcoming 1964 presidential election. However, on October 31st of 1963, Halloween, a reporter asked if he intended and expected to have Johnson on the ticket the following year. And John F. Kennedy replied yes to both those questions. There is little doubt that Bobby Kennedy and Johnson hated each other. Yet John and Bobby Kennedy agreed that dropping Johnson from the ticket could produce heavy losses in the South in the 1964 election, and they agreed that Johnson would stay on the ticket. So there you go. Let's look at LBJ leading all the way up to his presidency. Pretty interesting stuff. Now I'm going to just read you some fun facts about early life and some early on fun facts surrounding LBJ. So as I always give kind of the warning, some of these things might be a little repeated. I try not to, but just kind of going over some other stuff. Lyndon Johnson, let's see. He was born August 27th near the central Texas community of Johnson City, which was named for his relatives. Youngest Johnson, we know all this. Just kind of making sure I'm reading everything. In 1931, Johnson moved to Washington, D.C. to serve as a congressional secretary for newly elected U.S. Representative Richard Clayburgh of Texas. Energetic and capable, Johnson began to meet influential people and learn about the national political process. And on November 17th of 1934, he married Claudia Alta Lady Bird Taylor, a fellow Texan with whom he later had two daughters, Linda and Lucy. Lady Bird Johnson was a soft-spoken but well-educated woman from an affluent family and became a critical part of Johnson's political success. In 1935, Johnson returned home to become the Texas director of the National Youth Administration, a New Deal program of President FDR that helped young people find jobs or volunteer work during the Great Depression. So there you go. We know about his congressional career. We know, of course, about his time in the Senate. And then the White House years. We just went over all that stuff. So now, let's see what else we got here. Johnson was indeed from humble origins. The Johnson family had been in the area for generations, but Johnson's father had financial problems, and the future president grew up under difficult circumstances. As senator and president, Johnson had a chance to translate his sympathy for the less fortunate into real social policy laws. Interesting there. He was the son of a politician. Lyndon Baines Johnson was the son of Sam Early Johnson Jr., who was a member of the Texas legislature for 11 years. Despite being in politics, the family was not wealthy. Johnson worked throughout his youth to help support the family. Johnson's mother, REBEKAH Baines Johnson, graduated from Baylor University and worked as a journalist. So we know that. The Silver Star, we already talked about that. We're serving as a U.S. representative. Johnson joined the Navy to fight in World War II. He was an observer on a bombing mission where the plane's generator went out and they had to turn around. Some accounts reported that there was enemy contact, while others said there was none. His most thorough biographer, Robert Caro, accepts the account of the attack based on the statements from the crew, and Johnson was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in battle. As I said, he was the youngest Democratic majority leader. In 1937, Johnson was elected as a representative. 1949, he won a seat in the U.S. Senate. And by 1955, at the age of only 46, he became the youngest Democratic majority leader up to that time. He held a lot of power in Congress due to his participation in the Appropriations, Finance, and Armed Services Committees. So there you go there. Let me see what else we got here about good old LBJ. Oh, this is cool. He started out as a teacher. To pay for his time at Southwest Texas State Teachers College, which is now Texas State University, Johnson taught for 9 months at a segregated school for Mexican-American children south of San Antonio. The experience, as well as his time teaching in Pearsall, Texas, and in Houston, shaped his vision of how the government should help educate the country's youth. After signing the Higher Education Act of 1965, which used federal funds to help colleges extend financial aid to poor students, he remarked on his time teaching at the Wellhausen Mexican School, saying, "It was then I made up my mind that this nation could never rest while the door to knowledge remained closed to any American." We touched on that earlier, of course. Here we go. He was also a janitor. Johnson not only shared in the unfortunate tradition among teachers of using his own paycheck to pay for classroom supplies, he also wore multiple hats during his tenure as an educator. He taught 5th, 6th, and 7th grades, managed a team of 5 teachers, supervised the playground, coached a boys' baseball team and the debate team, and he mopped floors as the school's janitor. There you go. As I said, Johnson's father was a member of the Texas State House of Representatives for 9 non-consecutive years. His guiding connections helped Johnson enter politics, so we know all that. Awarded the Silver Star, we got into that. His entry into the Senate was a quote-unquote landslide. Johnson toured Texas in a helicopter for a 1948 Senate primary race that pitted him against former Governor Coke Stevenson and State Representative George Petty. Stevenson led the first round of voting, but without a majority, a runoff was called. Johnson won it and the nomination by only 87 votes, amid accusations of voter fraud. Biographer Robert Caro noted that Johnson's campaign manager and future governor, John B. Connolly, was connected with over 200 suspicious ballots from voters who claimed they hadn't voted, with election judge Luis Salas claiming almost 30 years later that he'd certified 202 phony ballots for Johnson. Stevenson challenged Johnson's win in court but lost, and Johnson went on to beat Republican Jack Porter in the general election. The accusations of fraud and the tight margin of his primary victory, of course, earned him the ironic name Landslide Lyndon. We know he almost died while serving in Senate. He had that heart attack. So there we go there. Just trying to see if there's anything else for you guys. Humble origins, we know that. First career was as a teacher. Johnson's political ambitions were clear early in his career because of his father. Johnson was the surrogate son of a powerful House Speaker, Sam Rayburn. The legendary Sam Rayburn had served in the Texas legislature with Johnson's father, and Rayburn backed Johnson's fast rise as a leader within Congress. We know he was nearly killed in World War II, or so the story goes. Landslide Lyndon. He became the Senate's leader. The energetic Johnson reshaped the role of Senate Majority Leader. Despite having a heart attack in 1955, Johnson worked tirelessly to promote himself and his agendas, including civil rights legislation and the American space program. His ability to persuade politicians of both parties was legendary. Johnson decided to become vice president after losing a bitter campaign against Kennedy in 1960. The Kennedys shocked observers by choosing Johnson as Kennedy's running mate. We know that. So there's that. Just trying to make sure there's nothing else. Nope. We're good there. Nope, good there. All right, I think we're good. So there you go. That is the kind of early life and leading up to his time as president for our 36th president of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson, good old LBJ. Hope you enjoyed this part 1, taking a look at the early life and childhood and rise through the political ranks of LBJ. And tomorrow, part 2, a look at his presidency, his legacy, and his death and burial site. So, thanks for all the support, guys. Thank you so much. We highly, highly appreciate everything. We can't thank you guys enough. You guys are all wonderful and great. Keep all those comments and questions coming. We really appreciate it. And, as always, we will see you tomorrow for part 2 of LBJ. Thanks, guys.